120 nautical miles off Somalia. The sea was black glass beneath a starless sky. Somewhere out there, 30 small dots crept across the radar screen of the USS Laboon, escorting the Navy tanker USNS Guadalupe, a ship carrying more than 8 million gallons of JP-5 jet fuel, enough to feed an entire carrier strike group for weeks. At first, the blips looked harmless, perhaps a cluster of fishing boats. Then the pattern sharpened, 30 fast-moving targets, advancing at 40 knots, fanning out like the claws of a predator. Within minutes, alarms screamed across the deck. Multiple contacts inbound, range 1,200 yards and closing fast. From the bridge, Captain Michael Harris could already see the glow of engines on the horizon. 30 speedboats, 250 armed men, rocket-propelled grenades, PKM machine guns, and DSHK heavy cannons welded to their bows. The Somali pirate front, led by warlord Khalid Kadar Abdulrahman, was coming for the tanker. But this time they weren't alone. Intelligence later traced encrypted signals to a new player, the Black Tide cartel, a transnational syndicate trading weapons for cocaine through African ports and South American coastlines. What began as piracy had evolved into global enterprise. At 03:30 a.m., the horizon erupted. RPGs streaked through the night, carving arcs of orange fire. The first rocket smashed into the Guadalupe's stern, tearing open steel and setting off a blaze near the fuel bay. Fire crews sprinted through smoke, foam cannons hissing. One spark in the wrong place could trigger a chain reaction, a blast equivalent to 30,000 pounds of TNT. The pirates pressed closer, firing AK-47s and DSHKs until the sea itself looked alive with tracer fire. The Laboon's gunners retaliated with 50 caliber bursts, shredding wooden hulls in seconds. Nearby, the cruiser USS Cape St. George roared into range, unleashing twin 20mm phalanx CIWS batteries, 4 500 tungsten shells per minute. The sky became a storm of light. Boats exploded, fuel ignited, debris rained down like burning snow. Within 15 minutes, 9 pirate skiffs were vaporized. Still, the swarm kept coming, reckless, relentless, willing to die for the prize. Then from nowhere, a new sound split the chaos. The chopping thunder of rotors. 3 CH-47 Chinooks swept in low, each carrying 120 Navy SEALs armed with M4A1 carbines and M320 grenade launchers. Above them, 3 AH-64E Apache gunships banked into firing position. Their 30mm cannons loaded with 1,200 rounds each, and an MQ-9 Reaper drone streaming live coordinates from 40,000 feet. America didn't come to negotiate, the radio operator muttered. It came with steel, fire, and fury. The helicopters tore through the night, Hellfire missiles finding targets amid the waves. Each impact turned another skiff into a rolling inferno. The surviving pirates scattered, their radios screaming orders in Somali and Arabic, but discipline broke under the onslaught. By 04:20 a.m., the battle had become slaughter. Yet the price was high. The Guadalupe's deck was scarred and smoking. 4 sailors were injured by shrapnel. 2 others lay burned beside the rail, still clutching their weapons. Inside the bridge, Captain Harris refused evacuation. The tanker would stay afloat or burn with him aboard. He radioed Camp Lemonnier in Djibouti, the U.S. military's only permanent base in Africa. Requesting air cover and strike authorization, he said. We're holding the line, but they're regrouping. On radar, new contacts bloomed, dozens more boats forming up 20 miles away. The pirates were not retreating. They were reorganizing. At 05:10 a.m., a drone feed revealed the source. Along the Somali coast near Barawi, satellite imagery showed a fortified compound, 12 warehouses, hidden fuel tanks, and hundreds of heat signatures. Analysts estimated 15 tons of weapons and 40,000 gallons of diesel stored there. It wasn't a pirate camp. It was a logistics hub for a global arms for drugs network. The name in the intercepted message sent chills through the ops room. Black Tide, a cartel that stretched from Aden to Bogota, laundering $50 million a month through shell companies and port authorities. The pirates were their muscle, their seaborne couriers trading guns for cocaine, fuel for opium, and lives for profit. The U.S. command issued the next order, codename Operation Dawn Cleaver. Phase 1, hold the sea. Phase 2, burn the source. As dawn broke, the ocean calmed, littered with charred wreckage. More than 70 pirates lay dead or dying, their boats drifting like black corpses on the water. But on shore, the real war was about to begin. Dawn Cleaver, into the teeth of Barawi. Dawn peeled the horizon like a knife. Heat from the burning skiffs clung to the air, and the sea still steamed where fuel had burned. On the flight deck of the USS Leon, crates were opened and weapons issued with practiced economy. Night optics, breaching charges, NP-key laser module bowls, thermal cameras, and magazines snapped into pistols and carbines. The operation changed from defensive to offensive in a single terse order: insert, secure, destroy. Three CH-47 Chinooks descended low over Barawi's scrubland, their downdrafts whipping sand and loose corrugated metal into the air. Each helicopter carried a 120-man SEAL element stacked like a tinderbox. The Apaches stayed high and lethal, circling with 30mm cannons cold but primed. Their pilots waited for frag patterns to unfold before painting targets with hellfires. The Chinooks hit the LZ in succession. Ropes dropped. Feet hit hot sand. The insertion was methodical. Two-man breachers leading each four-man entry team, suppressors swallowing the first sounds, magnetic breaching charges ready for lock steel. No shouting, no hand-waving. Movements were rehearsed down to breath counts. Inside the Barawi perimeter, warehouses hunkered behind berms and chain link, roofs sagging under tarpaulin and satellite dishes. Trucks retrofitted with DSHK mounts crouched in the shadows like metal beasts. Guard towers hosted sheen-eyed sentries, but their days of comfort were gone. First contact was sudden and close. A sentry's bolt flashed. A grenade launcher answered from a courtyard. The first entry team detonated a shaped charge against a reinforced door. Jagged metal screamed apart. Breach teams moved through smoke and dust, clearing rooms with aggressive piecing. Left shoulder, right shoulder. Check low, clear high. Hostile fire came from stacked crates and inverted shipping containers. SEALs engaged with control bursts, then shifted to rooms where explosives were staged. Explosions broke the compound into sound and rubble. An Apache pilot transmitted impact coordinates, then sliced a pickup truck's engine block with a precision 30mm pass. The truck erupted into a bloom of flames and metal shrapnel. Another hellfire pierced a covered weapons cache, igniting diesel and collapsing a lean-to into a furnace of flames. The ground shook like distant thunder. Tactical teams pushed through interconnected warehouses. Crates were opened in the fog of gunpowder and heat. Inside, pallets of Chinese-made AK pattern rifles wrapped in wax paper. Crates stamped with Cyrillic markings holding Type 80 machine guns. Iranian-made mortars, their barrels black with soot. Sandals and scorch marks told of hurried packing. Manifest cards and embossed crate tags told of routes: Aden, Mogadishu, clandestine docks in Latin America. A communications group breached a back office. Laptops were ripped from desks, hard drives yanked, and radios smashed open. Thermal scans found subterranean caches, tunnels lined with burlap and tie-downs. In one cellar, mattresses sat atop stacks of sealed boxes. The boxes opened into a white, crystalline shock. 500 kilograms of cocaine, vacuum-sealed and layered between crates of 7.62mm rounds. The trade was literal. Weapons stowed with narcotics, money tucked between pallets, the barter of continents made visible in a single dank room. The seizure rippled outward. SEALs found offshore manifests, transfer logs, and ship-to-ship handover dates scribbled in code. A ledger with shell company names linked to accounts in Aden, Djibouti, and Panama. Microfilm, encrypted thumb drives, and physical receipts. $32 million in cash. Half-burned but still legible in places. Forensic teams bagged documents and cataloged serial numbers. Serial-traced rifles tied back to prior skirmishes. The numbers matched rounds recovered from pirate skiffs days earlier. Combat tightened. Insurgents tried to mass into a freight yard using trucks to create moving shields. Apaches cut formations with cannon bursts. One convoy attempted to flee down a scrub track. An Apache pilot engaged with a 30mm strafing run, sending 3 trucks into the air and spinning them into wreckage. Survivors tumbled into the sand, some shot, others stunned, only to be taken alive or accounted for as bodies. SEALs moved through the aftermath like surgeons, securing prisoners, ripping detonators and communications gear, and cataloging bomb-making materials. Explosive ordnance disposal teams detonated booby traps in controlled sequences. Secondary explosions bloomed after charges were rendered safe. Powder drums, jerry cans, and cash sets that might have vaporized the entire compound were neutralized. Controlled demolitions were staged in a concentrated arc. Warehouses that housed the bulk of arms, fuel reserves, and cash were set to burn on command. Charges were laid to deny the network any stores to reclaim. When the detonation sequence began, the compound convulsed. Walls bent inward, corrugated roofs peeled off, and fuel-fed infernos climbed into the morning sky. The blast sent shockwaves across the coastline. Black columns of smoke marked the death of the supply node. By mid-morning, the kill count rose. 91 militants were confirmed neutralized, dozens more captured. SEAL teams had freed 6 hostages, including 2 American civilian engineers whose wrists still bore rusted chain marks. Medical Corps stabilized the wounded in the shadow of the closest Chinook and loaded them aboard the birds for transfer back to the fleet. The field hospital was a cluster of triage tents and urgency, a line of stretchers, and the acrid tang of burnt fuel and powder. Forensics moved fast. Weapon crates yielded serial numbers and origin tags. A crate label traced to a manufacturer in Eastern Europe. Shipping manifests referenced ports in Colombia and Djibouti, with intermediate carriers in the Persian Gulf. Microtransactions traced through shell accounts indicated consistent payments tied to a single laundering route. One electronic ledger, partially decrypted, showed recurring transfers tied to an entity labeled Black Tide Logistics. Another record referenced an intermediary in Tehran. The picture formed a lattice: pirates as muscle, cartel networks as financiers, state-adjacent brokers as middlemen. A final sweep turned up the smoking heart of the operation. A subterranean vault padded with burlap, stacked with hard currency in sealed cases. IC analysts counted $32 million in various currencies. The serials reflected recent bundles flown through a network of couriers. Next to the cash sat a ledger of sales agreements in weight conversions. Kilograms of cocaine matched to pallets of small arms. The math was brutal and pragmatic. 1 metric ton of drugs for a pallet of weapons, cash layered in between. The exchange rates, the routes, the ledgers, everything pointed to a single horrifying conclusion. Barawi was not an isolated pirate enclave. It was a node in a transcontinental trafficking pipeline linking the Horn of Africa to Latin America and the Middle East. As demolition teams finished their work, SEAL teams began methodically hauling remaining prisoners to holding zones. Interrogations began in the field, short, sharp, designed to extract routes, names, and handed-off points. The prisoners yielded fragments: names of brokers, small unassuming peers used for night transfers, payment addresses burned into memory. Analysts on the Lioune cross-referenced those fragments with the documents seized. Patterns emerged: shell corporations registered in Aden, payment routes through Djibouti banks, and a list of shipping agents with plausible deniability. Operation Dawn Cleaver concluded with the compound leveled, warehouses blackened, and supply lines severed. More than 15 tons of weapons had been destroyed or seized: AK pattern rifles, Type 80 machine guns, 200 RPG launchers, and millions of rounds of various calibers. 50,000 rounds of artillery and large quantities of Javelin-class munitions were accounted for and secured aboard the fleet. The sea lanes that morning were populated with flotsam, broken skiffs, burned planks, ragged flags, evidence of a sea battle that had bled into the sand. The strategic implications were immediate and fierce. Financial records indicated more than $50 million in illicit transfers over the preceding months, money that had flowed through the Black Tide network and into accounts that traced back to entities with ties to Tehran and to cartel intermediaries in South America. The evidence suggested the pirates were not merely opportunists, they were contracted operators in a brokered war of commerce: guns for drugs, fuel for favors, and shipping lanes for profit. By late afternoon, the air smelled of ash and spent cordite. SEALs boarded the Chinooks with crates of evidence. Apaches trimmed their fuel loads and lifted off. The fleet began transferring munitions and casualties. The USNS Guadalupe remained wounded but afloat, its million-gallon belly intact, a testament to crew discipline and damage control. There was no cheering, only a solemn return to duty. Men cataloged the cost: 91 militants eliminated, dozens detained, millions in cash seized, and a logistics hub erased. But the ledger had deeper margins, even as piles of paper and thumb drives smoldered under forensic lights. Analysts knew the networks that bankrolled Barawi would splinter, adapt, and reconstitute elsewhere. The strike had been surgical, but it was also a flare in a much darker map. Operation Dawn Cleaver had burned a node from the Black Tide network, laid open the ledger of global trade in arms and drugs, and demonstrated a single brutal truth: the ocean's shadow economies were no longer isolated. They were industrial, financed, and interconnected. The Gulf had spit out no simple pirates that morning. It had coughed up evidence of an emerging transnational war of commerce. The question that remained, heavy as the smoke on the horizon, was where the next node would be and who would staff it. The aftermath, the hidden war beneath the waves. The fires of Barawi burned for 6 hours. Columns of smoke coiled into the dawn sky, visible from 30 miles at sea. The shoreline looked like a scar carved into the continent. Warehouses flattened, fuel silos melted, earth scorched into glass. The detonation echoes rolled across the water long after the last Apache lifted off. By mid-morning, the Gulf of Aden was silent again. Not peaceful, just emptied. Wrecked boats drifted aimlessly, their splintered hulls glinting under the hard sun. Seabirds circled above floating fuel slicks and bodies tangled in rope. The ocean had consumed the pirates it once carried. On the deck of the USS Leon, sailors scrubbed soot from the metal and replaced torn flags. Technicians cataloged the debris that had been recovered from the water: burnt cell phones, encrypted radios, half-melted GPS units, still blinking coordinates. In the command center, analysts connected those dots into a single lattice of betrayal and profit. From the intelligence brief compiled that day, a pattern emerged: wire transfers, satellite pings, cargo manifests, shell corporations, all feeding into a black ledger of global trade in contraband and chaos. The Black Tide cartel wasn't merely a sponsor, it was the logistical backbone. It used pirate fronts as extensions of its network, funneling weapons from Eastern Europe through the Horn of Africa, exchanging them for South American cocaine, laundering profits through ghost accounts in Djibouti and the Caribbean. Each route fed another, each intermediary vanished as soon as a name was spoken. Behind the pirates stood brokers with government connections, shipping agents with diplomatic immunity, and financiers operating from glass towers thousands of miles from the smoke that still rose over Somalia. Barawi's destruction exposed the anatomy of a modern war without borders. This wasn't the piracy of the 2000s, men with rifles and rubber boats chasing ransom money. This was paramilitary enterprise built on logistics, financing, and a cold calculation of global weakness. The operations yield was staggering: 15 tons of weapons destroyed or seized, $32 million in hard currency recovered from the vault, 500 kilograms of cocaine discovered in cargo pits, 91 militants killed, 46 captured, and 6 hostages rescued. Digital intelligence mapping: 50 million in illicit transfers traced to front companies across 3 continents. Each number told a story, but together they revealed a system, a shadow economy that thrived wherever nations looked away. At noon, as crews transferred the wounded in sealed evidence crates, the scale of the avoided disaster came into focus. Had the pirates succeeded, 8.2 million gallons of jet fuel aboard the Guadalupe would have ignited into an explosion brighter than the sun, a detonation visible from orbit. The tanker's survival wasn't just tactical, it was existential for the entire fleet. The sailors who held their positions amid fire and shrapnel had averted what could have been the largest non-nuclear blast in maritime history. By late afternoon, the sky over the Gulf shifted from gray to bruised orange. The wind changed direction, pushing the last smoke plumes toward open sea. On the Leon's bridge, damage control crews stood at ease for the first time in 12 hours. They had seen a battle that would never appear in official news. The only record was what the sea left behind, and the encrypted data now pouring through intelligence channels back to Washington. At Camp Lemonnier in Djibouti, analysts decrypted fragments from Barawi's recovered laptops. The deeper they dug, the darker the picture became. Communications routed through Tehran, broker signatures originating from Caracas, payment chains stretching through Dubai, Mombasa, and the Cayman Islands. Names of consultants matching known aliases in global arms trading circles. The conclusion was chilling. The pirates had been pawns in a proxy war of commerce. Weapons moved east, drugs moved west, and money circulated in the middle, a three-continent triangle of power and corruption. The seas that once defined freedom of navigation had become the bloodstream of organized crime. Night fell again over the Indian Ocean. The Guadalupe, patched but proud, resumed her slow crawl north. Her decks were scorched, her railings twisted, but her flag still caught the wind, a tattered emblem of defiance. From the escorting ships, sailors watched the horizon flicker with the last fires of Barawi still burning against the night like the ghost of a warning. For those who fought there, victory carried no celebration. They had faced a battle no one would officially acknowledge, a conflict fought in the margins between piracy, organized crime, and undeclared warfare. They had seen the line blur between smugglers and soldiers, between profit and ideology. In Washington, briefings spread across intelligence agencies, maps filled with red lines, trade routes, bank transfers, encrypted nodes. Officials debated terminology. Piracy, terrorism, cartel-backed insurgency. But the distinction no longer mattered. The patterns were converging. A classified report from naval intelligence summed it in one sentence. The sea is no longer a border. It is a mirror of the wars we refuse to see coming. Weeks later, satellite imagery showed new movements along the African coast. Small convoys of trucks headed inland, carrying what remained of the Black Tides network. Barawi had been erased, but the supply lines adapted. The enemy had lost a fortress, not a system. From the Pentagon's perspective, Operation Dawn Cleaver had been a triumph. But within the Navy, among those who had smelled the burning oil and tasted salt mixed with cordite, it felt more like a warning. If 250 men with skiffs and rocket launchers could nearly cripple a U.S. fleet, what would happen when the same tactics were backed by a nation-state, with destroyers, submarines, and satellite coordination? The Gulf of Aden, once the cradle of piracy, had become the testing ground for hybrid warfare, where organized crime, mercenaries, and intelligence assets collided beneath the same flag of convenience. As the ships crossed the Red Sea under moonlight, the sailors of the Guadalupe stood in silence. They had survived the impossible, but what they had witnessed would outlive them. In the distance, the dark outline of Africa faded behind the horizon. Ahead lay open water, the same black expanse that had birthed empires, carried wars, and swallowed secrets. The sea no longer separated nations. It connected their sins. And somewhere beyond that line, unseen but certain, another storm was already forming.